Hey everybody, so I got a request to make a video to show how to make a picnic table for the chess project. So let's get started. The first thing that I want to do is I want to come to my line tool to make a horizon. I'm going to put the horizon up a little bit, maybe 3/4 of the way up the page. Draw a straight line across, and this is a 1-point perspective picture. Now that line isn't going to show because I have a fill color but no stroke color. So I'm going to turn off the fill color and turn on the stroke, and I'm going to choose something in the black area for the horizon line. And I want to give it a little bit of width. It's got 4.468, that should be fine. I'm going to hit enter, and if I just move off that layer I did by creating a new layer, I have the horizon line and we can see that now visually. Alright, now to put in a vanishing point, sometimes I put a letter X, sometimes I just make a dot. Just gonna, for brevity and ease, make a dot with the paintbrush tool. I want a nice solid dot, so I want to turn off my hardness. And 27 pixels is small but still visible. Again, it's on a very light color here, so I want to make it something I can see well, so I'm gonna do a red dot. And I'm gonna put it somewhere near the center but not in the center. Okay, so now I have a vanishing point and a horizon line. So the next thing that I have to do is do the basic shape of the table. Now we're not seeing this end that's nearest us. For this request we're going to be seeing the outside edges of the table and the back edge, and then there'll be a chess set placed on it. Something similar to what I did in my chess set project. Alright, so I'm going to start by giving us some guidelines. So I'm going to start at the vanishing point, and I'm going to determine the width of the table. Let's make it a pretty wide table and bring it off the edge here. Alright, now I could either start here or here. Sometimes it's kind of hard to start here when you make the next line because it wants to grab that line that already exists. Or sometimes it'll put it on the same layer and that makes it a little difficult. So I'm just going to start down here. And I'm going to make the table wide this way but leave more room on that side. And again, depending upon where your vanishing point is and the angle that you're viewing the table, that could change. Now we're putting in the table. Let's figure out how far away the edge of the table is going to be. I'm just going to randomly pick a spot, and I'm going to draw a horizontal line. If I click Shift when I'm dragging across, even if I bring my brush pretty far down, if I go too far down I'll go to 45 degrees, but it should bring a direct horizontal line. So when you hold Shift, it constrains it to 45 degrees, so it would be straight across. 45 degrees or another 45 degrees is 90 degrees, which is straight down. I'm going to go back to line 3, and you can see that's highlighted there. And I'm going to choose my direct select tool and click on this end. And if you notice this end is a square that's blue now, or it was white a moment ago, and now it's white again. And this end is blue because I clicked on this end. So now I'm going to click and hold and drag. And I can go exactly right to that spot and make sure that I'm right on that line. And what that does for me is it gives me 2 of the lines I need, and it's still pointing directly at that. I didn't change that angle at all. Line 2 was the other line, so I'm going to click here, choose that end, and then click and drag it and bring it back to the edge of the table. Alright, so now I have the table defined, but it's on 3 separate layers. And notice my layers are getting confusing already because I don't have anything named. So line 1 here, I'm going to call that horizon, and layer 1 I'm going to call vanishing point. Alright, and if I wanted to I can put those on the same layer or leave them separate. I tend to leave them separate because sometimes I'll want to use the horizon line when I'm making other parts and I don't need the vanishing point. For example, if I were putting in water or grass or something up to the horizon, that'll give me a good visual shot, but I don't necessarily need the vanishing point. And other times I could work with the vanishing point and not need to see the horizon either. Alright, so what I would do here is I would take these 3 layers. Let's say line 2, line 3, and line 4. This is line 2 here, this is line 3, and that's line 4. I have them all selected, by hitting Shift and selecting the outside edges. And then I'm going to right click on those and I'm going to merge the shapes together. So now on line 3 I have all 3 shapes and I'm going to call that the tabletop. So that's my tabletop layer, and now if I want to I can fill that because it's all on one layer. What I want to do though is typically if I go to use my fill tool, you'll see I'll bring it over here, I get a circle with a slash through it. And the reason for that is the layer is a vector layer and it needs to be rasterized. So I'm going to right click on there and I'm going to rasterize the layer so that I can make adjustments to it. And then notice I get my paint bucket tool back. I want to choose something in the browns. Usually when I want the browns I go to the oranges. So this is sort of a bright orange over here. And the more I go down here it gets darker and darker and darker till I get to a very saturated black. If I go to the left it gets lighter and lighter. It's the tints getting to almost to white. So this would be a very light tint of that orange. This is a very dark shade of that orange, right? But I got a pretty deep brown there, and that's okay. So I'm going to drop that on there. So now I have the shape of the tabletop. And if you remember the picture that I was working with, in fact, let me pause this and I'm going to put that on. All right, so here's the chessboard image that the student is trying to work on, something similar to this. So notice I have the table here. It's got a wood grain on it, a brown color. It also has sort of the slots between, like a picnic table, and we're seeing the openings at the edge here where the separations between the boards are. All right, so that's what the student is trying to emulate. So let's take a look and see how that's done. Let's go back to Photoshop and we have the table. Now this one is not quite as wide as that one. So a couple of ways I can approach this. What I'd like to do next is I would like to put a wood grain finish on here. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to bring in a wood grain texture and I'm going to align it with the image, and then I'm going to use one of the blending modes on the layer to allow me to do that. Okay, so I've located a texture that I'd like to use. Here it is. So I'm just going to drag that onto my image, and you see it puts it in roughly the center of the page. And I can still, while it's still got that blue X through it, I can still scale it if I want to. I want to scale it out to cover the width of the table. I'm going to drag it to that corner, and let's scale it out some more to cover a little bit over there. And I can bring it up. When I have it the way I want it, I'm going to click the check mark. Have the grain moving in the direction that I want. That's going to work fine. So now I can come in and go edit, and while I'm on that same wood layer, edit, go to transform, and I'm going to use distort. There are many reasons to use other things. I'm going to use distort for this. So I'm just going to drag the corner, and you may have to do this in smaller stages than I'm doing it, but I'm just dragging it to approximate it to the corners of the object, and I'm going to drag this out and make sure it's down, showing out the bottom. Now I do want to make sure that I'm right on, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to click the check mark for now, and I'm going to take my zoom tool and zoom into the corners, and I'm going to go back to edit, transform, and distort, and if I look, I was a little bit over on that corner, just ever so slightly. And let's see where we are on this corner. The closer I'm zoomed in, the better I can see it, so that looks pretty spot on. Let's come down to where it meets at the bottom. That was definitely over, and as I move it, I'm just going to make sure that I'm not losing any of the other parts. And now I can come out to here. Notice this is way out there, and it's definitely off here. So I'm going to move this out. I can also move it up a little bit because this is lower than the other one was. And I'm going to get it right on the edge. And I can just keep checking to ensure that when I moved one, it didn't affect the others. And I'm going to hit Command 0. I'm on a Mac. If I were on a PC, it would be Control 0. And now I have that wood grain overlaid over that. So now how do I make that blend to the brown color I had below it? I'm going to go to the blending modes. So it's set for normal. And you'll see as I change the blending modes, what's going to happen is the color below it is going to start showing through. And I can pick the blending mode that works best for my project. I can also choose to lighten up the opacity. It's at 100% opacity. I can turn that down a little bit so it's not so powerful and strong. But for now, let me just find something that's going to work. Some of these will, down here, the overlay soft light, those look pretty nice. Hard light's looking kind of nice. So when I find the one that's kind of outdoorsy looking, I'm going to go with the hard light. And then I can, like I said, if that's just too strong, you can just pop down the opacity a little bit and kind of let the painting that I did under it do a lot of the work. That's at 40%. That's a little too light. Here we go. Something around 58% seems pretty good for this piece. Okay, so now I want to put some of the lines in the table where the board to make the board separate. So what I want to do is I'm just going to use the vanishing point and use the line tool for now. And when I clicked on the line tool, I'm looking, it has a fill right now. I don't need a fill, so I'm going to turn that off. I'm going to give it a stroke, and the stroke against this brown, unless I make it a little thicker, it may not show up as black, but I'm going to use black for now. We can always change it, and I just want to make it a little thicker. So I'm going to bring it up to it's at 4.68 pixels. I'm just going to drag it up something about 12.5 pixels. And what I want to do is I want to kind of divide the table in half. So approximately halfway between here and here, I'm going to bring a line from here, and that looks about halfway to my eyes. And then I can do the same, divide this half in half and divide that half in half, right? So let's do that. So dividing that approximately in half is about that. And then one more, I'm going to divide that section in half approximately. It doesn't have to be exact, but it'll look a little bit more realistic if it's close. Alright, so now I can do what I did before, where I can go to hit A and chooses the direct select tool. Click that line, click and hold, and walk it back right to that spot. And I want to be right at the edge of the table if possible. Let's move down to the next line, click the end, click and hold, and drag it right back to here. And then finally line 1, and I'm going to click and drag that and drag it back to the edge. And if I want, I can merge all of this stuff into the tabletop. Take a look. I'm going to zoom in a little bit to see how close those ends are before I rasterize. So that looks pretty good. Let's click off there so I can see it. Now let's click off that one. Yeah, those look pretty good, so I can work with that. Alright, so let's zoom back out, Command 0 or Control 0, and you can see it's kind of divided into 3 different slats. I used a wider separation in the picture with my chessboard. Let's go to the chessboard picture. So I used a much wider opening. You can adjust that as you need it. Different tables are built differently. This one might be a tighter table. So now what I want to do is I want to make a notch at the end where those are. So let me rasterize those 3 lines since they are where I like them. I'm going to rasterize them, and then I'm going to merge them down. I want them on top of the wood grain, but I don't want it to overlay with the wood grain. So I'm going to first merge the wood grain onto the tabletop, and then I can merge these 3 lines with the tabletop. So I'm going to select all 4 together, and I'm going to merge layers. Okay, so now I have a rasterized, what looks like wood slats. I can do a couple of different things with these. One of the things that I did was I zoomed in, and I went with the erase tool. And I just kind of dug a notch with the erase tool. So let's click on the eraser. And right now I have an eraser that's got a good hardness, and it's got kind of a little too big for my need size, so I'm going to bring it down about half of that. And I'm just going to put a little notch right at the end, and all I have to do is line it up where I want it and give it a little click. That's what gave me the notch that I made. So right into the line, That might be a little thick for the size of the line I have, but I'm going to be okay with that for now. So now when I zoom out, Command 0, you can see it's got a little bit of a table, a patio table, picnic table kind of look. One of the things that I didn't do with mine, but that I would consider doing here, might be to round this edge a little bit, and this edge as well. Just because this is rounded, just to give it a little bit of a finished look. Rounding those edges might be helpful. And the way I would do that would be probably using the pen tool, and I'd make a Bezier curve, and then I'd try and match it closely on the other side. So let's zoom in again. I'm going to hit Z, and I'm going to zoom into this corner here. I'm going to I'm going to hit P to get back to the pen tool. So I'm going to hit P. And here's how I'm going to make the edge rounded. I'm going to click here, then I'm going to click right across from it about the same distance from the point, and I'm going to just drag a little bit of a curve there. Now I can click up here, over here, back here, and so long as this is on path, I can turn that into a selection and click OK. And now that that's a selection, I can just hit delete, and that should trim that little corner off and make it a little bit rounded. So I'm going to go Command D to deselect, and you can see the edge is now softer and rounded. And I could do that a little bit with this as well. The edges here, if they're a little bit pointy on the edges, I can soften them if I want. Let's go get that other edge on this side, which is a little sharper. I'm going to go here and here, drag it out, and I don't want to do it too close to the edge because then I won't trim anything off. Come up here, over to here, and back to here, and make it a selection. So I'm going to click Make Selection, and click OK, and then hit Delete. So now I got some nice rounded corners on the edges of the table. Okay, so you can see now that I have the notches, the ends of the boards are kind of rounded. So it gives that feeling that, oh, even though these lines, these black lines here are not actual grooves, it kind of gives the feeling of a groove. There are many more things that you can do with this to get it to look more realistic, but I think that we're off to a real good start with this. And I would kind of just leave this here, and let's see what my students can come up with as far as the table that they're placing their chess set on. Keep in mind that you don't have to do an outdoor scene. I did an outdoor scene, doesn't mean that you have to do one. It could be on a kitchen table or a dining room table, which would be an entirely different type of table. But if you want it to look sort of realistic, sort of like a table that you can play a game of chess on outdoors, think about doing something like a picnic table. Maybe add another slat out here on this side, or not, and your board would go in over here someplace. Maybe you could have a bench over here that you can see, and maybe you would see only a little bit of this bench on this side, because remember, this is our viewpoint where the viewer is looking, so the viewer would see more on this side than they would on the other side. Alright, that's pretty much all there was to making the table. It was not a very complicated process, and I think it looks pretty decent.